Well, good morning again, everyone. Please go ahead and find your seats. We're going to go ahead and get started. I know people are still milling in. I heard there's a little bit of rain outside, slowing everybody down this morning. But we're going to go ahead and get started with our program this morning. Welcome to the 6th Annual Georgia Logistics Summit. It is great to see you all here this morning. It's been a neat ride for the past 6 years, bringing together a conference for you, and I've been very privileged to be able to enable this for you guys to get together once a year. Please go ahead and find your seats. There's volunteers around if you're looking for seats. I think there's plenty of seats in the back with the open seating. Just from housekeeping, there are bathrooms out to your right and left. So if you need to use those, they're men's and women's on both sides. Good morning again. First of all, I want to thank you to all of our sponsors, specifically to the Savannah Economic Development Authority and the World Trade Center Savannah for our breakfast this morning. Hopefully you got a chance to have some of that. Also for Rockefeller, the Rockefeller Group for our all-day coffee that was available yesterday and also throughout the day today. A special thank you to MIQ, who is our bottled water sponsor. If you look on all your tables, we were supposed to have this yesterday, and sometimes you can't control your supply chain, and the water wasn't here yesterday. It was no fault of MIQ's. They were a fantastic 3PL. They weren't the ones delivering it. So our apologies for that, but you'll see the MIQ water on all your tables this morning. So thanks again. And if you were here yesterday, we had a great session, heard from manufacturers, heard from our growing and expanding companies in Georgia. And then we wrapped up the day with a special thank you to CSX and Norfolk Southern for co-hosting our reception last night. Thank you again for that. Hope you enjoyed the panel sessions, took advantage of a lot of the networking we put in front of you yesterday. Thought we had a really good day. If you can see in the program, we've got an equally good day for you as well today. Some really great sessions, and I want to get it kicked off. So without further delay, I want to introduce our first guest. Today I have the pleasure of introducing the Georgia Department of Economic Development's Commissioner Chris Carr, and my boss. He took the helm of the Georgia Department of Economic Development this past November and has already made quite an impact with his integrated approach to our economic development efforts, whether it's through our Centers of Innovation program, the Global Commerce Division, international trade, tourism, entertainment, arts, or the Workforce Development Office. Chris knows the importance of economic development and the importance that Georgia's logistics industry plays in those efforts and bringing jobs and investment here to our state. It's important to note that countless companies who locate and expand here in Georgia talk about our logistics network as one of the main reasons why they decided to locate here and identify our network and the assets we have in place as one of our strongest assets. So without further ado, please help me giving a great Georgia Logistics Summit welcome for our Commissioner, Chris Carr.
Well, good morning. I am very excited to be at this record-setting 2014 Georgia Logistics Summit. And let me start by thanking Paige Siplon and his outstanding team for putting on this fantastic event. Please, can we give them a round of applause? This event is the largest state-led event of its kind in the country. So let me give you a little bit of perspective. The inaugural event happened in 2009 with 450 attendees. Last year we had 2,000, and this year we have over 2,200 attendees at this fantastic event, and we just can't thank you enough for your time and for your presence here today. Let me also encourage you to look at our brand new logistics industry brochure, which you can find on your table. It's hot off the press. You're the first group to be seeing it. And we are very proud of it because it's full of valuable logistics information. And it is my pleasure this morning to be able to introduce our Governor, Nathan Deal. Governor Deal has been such a supporter of economic development, and he understands the importance of logistics in ensuring that Georgia is a leader in the global marketplace. When Governor Deal came into office in 2011, he made it a priority of his to make sure that Georgia is the #1 place in the nation to do business. And in November, his goal was made a reality when Site Selection magazine named us #1 in the nation. Governor Deal has been such a supporter. He understands that Georgia's logistics helps us expand and bring new business to our state and to ensure that folks around the world want to come and do business in Georgia. So please join me in welcoming Georgia's Governor, Nathan Deal.
Good morning, and thank you all for being here. I want to begin by thanking Paige and his crew for, once again, putting on a great meeting. We welcome those of you who are within our state. We welcome those of you who are from other states, and we welcome those of you who are from other countries. This is a day when Georgia wants to tell you how good we are. So you'll just have to allow us to brag just a little bit. That's what we're here to tell you about, and we think that we have a great story to communicate with you. Now, you're going to hear from some individuals who I presume will be on the panel discussion behind me. They will each play a role and do play a role in the great logistics system that we have in the state of Georgia. Everything from our Commissioner of Economic Development, to who you just heard from, and I might add that Chris Carr has done a great job in moving into that role, taking over from Chris Comiskey, who also had done an excellent job for our state. We've been very fortunate to have such leadership in a very critical area for development. You're going to also hear from Ed Crowell, who is the CEO of Georgia Motor Trucking Association, from Charles Tarbutton, who is the board chair of the Georgia Railroad Association, and from Curtis Foltz, who is our CEO of the Georgia Ports Authority. As you can recognize, all of those play a very critical role in the issue of transportation. We also are going to have Miguel Southwell, the Interim Aviation Development Manager of Hartsfield-Jackson Atlanta Airport, and there again, a very important component of what this state offers. But we want to give you an overview of what is happening in Georgia. As was cited just recently in the introduction, we were very pleased last fall to have Site Selection Magazine name Georgia the #1 state in the nation in which to do business. But there are many components that allowed us to reach that pinnacle of success. One of those is the logistics arena in which you all work, and we thank you for what you do. Georgia at the present time is the home to more than 12,000 logistic service providers. In fact, we employ more people in the logistics sector than all but 4 other states in the United States. And the reasons are very simple, as you will hear from the panelists in just a few minutes. The 4th largest and fastest growing container port in the United States, the Port of Savannah. The world's busiest and most efficient passenger airport, which includes a top-ranked hub for international air cargo. 2 Class I railroads, CSX and Norfolk Southern, both of which have access into our ports. And of course, multiple interstates that connect not only points within our state, but connect us with other states as well. In fact, 80% of the United States market can be reached from Georgia within a 2-hour air travel or 2 days if you're traveling by road. Not very many states can make that claim to being so strategically located. Now, our assets are not just scattered and disjointed. We think that they all work positively together, and you will hear that story, I'm sure, as these panelists talk to you. We are seeing a continued growth in distribution, warehousing. We are continuing to see a growth in IT companies, and that is the kind of growth that makes a state strong and is an important and vital part of any transition of goods and services across the state and across the country. We have more than 1,200 new projects that have started in our state since I became governor in January of 2011. And we are now in the range of some 240,000 new private sector jobs that have been created in Georgia during that same time frame. We take pride in that because we think it is an indication that more and more of the world is discovering that Georgia is a good place to do business. We have major infrastructure projects that are in the development stage right now. For those of you who are familiar with our interstate system, We have a major Northwest Corridor project up I-75. We have another major project of an interchange at I-285 and Highway 400. Last year, our port continued to grow. It had a record year of both imports and exports, and we moved up to number 11 in terms of the largest exporting states in the country. The future of our port, we think, is bright. Now, we are working diligently on the deepening of our port project. There's been a lot in the news lately about where the status of that project might be. I am encouraged that we are very soon going to see the last technical hurdle removed by way of the increase of the authorization limits by federal legislation. But in the meantime, the state of Georgia, as recently as last night when we passed the budget, included another $35 million in our state budget, which brings us to $266 million of state money that we are prepared to spend and use for this development of the port and deepening project. In fact, we're going to proceed with those items that are essential to this project being completed. Dredging is probably the last phase of the project, but there are things we can do before that, such as buying additional land that we need for environmental mitigation purposes. And we're moving forward with that, and hopefully the last technical objection, as I said, will be removed by Congress very soon. Now, we are very fortunate, I think, in our state to continue to see a growth in the transit and shipping arena. As recently as yesterday, a new press release was issued citing that UASC has decided to relocate their North American headquarters to Gwinnett County, Georgia, and will bring with it multi-million dollars capital of investment and about 160 new jobs. I think further indication that Georgia is a good place to do business. For those of you who are here and a part of our mosaic of enterprise, we thank you for that. For those of you who are considering our state, please let us know what else we can tell you to be able to induce you to come our way. Thank you all for being here. Thank you for what you do to make our state strong and our nation strong. Thank you.
Thank you, Governor Deal. Thank you for all you do for our industry.
Thank you, Toby.
Thank you very much. Let's get another round of applause for our Governor Nathan Deal. Thank you, Governor. So as the Governor mentioned, we've got a great transportation panel lined up for you. We have, and they've already been introduced, but I'll go through it again. We have a panel of leaders from across the transportation network, across our ecosystem. As frankly, I use the word too much, that we look at and call logistics and transportation. You'll hear from all of them, and then we're going to open it up for Q&A. They've got a short, we call it a rapid-fire transportation panel, because frankly, each of them could stand up here and fill another hour with all the things that are going on and how important they are to Georgia, yes, but also to the Southeast and to our nation, and you're going to hear some of those comments this morning. So we call it a rapid-fire transportation on purpose. So as our panel comes out, please help me in welcoming, just save your applause to the end, Toby Carr, who's the Director of Planning for GDOT, Ed Crowell, the President of the Georgia Motor Trucking Association, Charles Tarbutton, the President of the Georgia Railroad Association, Miguel Southwell, the Interim General Aviation Manager for our Atlanta Airport, and Curtis Foltz, the Executive Director of the Georgia Ports Authority. A round of applause for our panel. So we're going to get right into it. Our first speaker is going to be Mr. Toby Carr, the Director of Planning for Georgia Department of Transportation. Please help me welcome Toby Carr.
Thank you very much. Paige, thank you, and good morning. Those of you from Georgia, thanks for being here. From those of you from outside, welcome. My name is Toby Carr. I'm the Director of Planning for the Georgia Department of Transportation. I'm here to tell a little bit of the story of how we're investing in our surface infrastructure to support our intermodal network that we have here in Georgia. And Georgia has been benefiting for a long time, literally from its inception, from investments in surface transportation infrastructure, ports, and rail. We were founded at the Port of Savannah as a colony. Immediately we had a port. As the railroads came on, that continued to support the agriculture business here. Our roads and the interstate system only added to that. We have the world's busiest airport. Our intermodal transportation network is first class, and we want to continue to grow and support that. In my role as the Director of Planning, I work for the governor at the department to work with the commissioner who also works for the board to make sure that we're making the right kinds of investments to support freight, to support people mobility, to get the most we can, the most bang for the buck out of everything that we do. And so it's an ongoing effort. Planning happens year-round. As soon as we get one plan wrapped up, we move into the next. So with that, I'm going to jump right into really what guides the investment in the state of Georgia for freight and logistics. In 2012, we completed the Georgia Statewide Freight and Logistics Action Plan, and it was a fantastic example of public-private partnership at the planning level to make sure that we're doing strategically what we need to do. And it was done with the Georgia Department of Transportation, the Department of Economic Development, and we had a public sector advisory group represented by the folks that you see up here, the organizations up here. Many of you, I want to thank so many of you who participated in that, because what it did is it said, here are the assets that we have in the state of Georgia. Here's the vision for how we continue to improve and invest to make sure that the great system we have today is going to be great tomorrow and continue to support Georgia's growth, support ports that are going to be growing, support an agriculture business that's going to need to grow to continue to supply food with global demand, and make sure that we have everything done that we can do. And as a study, I'm happy to report it wasn't one that just went right on a shelf, right? And that's something that sometimes you can see as well. We studied this and then we couldn't do it. No, this actually began a great conversation. The clarity, the focus, and the value proposition that the Georgia Statewide Freight and Logistics Action Plan represented to the state of Georgia immediately was able to be put into action in last year's legislative session. So since you were just here last year, Georgia was able to take a huge step forward in getting, again, more value for the transportation dollar by creating the statewide designated freight corridors. The corridors that you see up here are state strategic priorities that can be improved, expanded, maintained. We can put new investments for operations, new investments for incident response onto these networks when the project is ready and when the funding is available, and then it can move. Because in the state of Georgia, we have something called, and we still have it, it's called congressional district balancing. And the idea is a very good one. The idea is you have 14 congressional districts, they're all even by people. People pay taxes into the transportation network. Everybody needs the transportation network to benefit. Let's return those resources to the people. And generally it's a good idea, but it does break down with big strategic projects that don't just benefit one congressional district. And so I'll pick out a project central to our freight and logistics system, central to the state of Georgia geographically. That's the I-16, I-75 interchange. It's right there in the middle of the map. And the I-16-75 interchange needs to be improved. It's a very expensive project. And for years, we've been developing it, and we were trying to get it to fit just inside Congressional District 8, because that's where it's at, Congressional District 8. We get it close, and then what happens? The 2010 census. And we redraw the maps. And now, the I-16-75 interchange is in Congressional District 2, and we're scratching our heads trying to figure out now how to make it fit inside Congressional District 2 while still delivering critical transportation infrastructure to District 2, which has Columbus, we have Fort Benning, it has Albany, we have the marine logistics base, we have critical roads, ag, military investments to be making in 2. We weren't really planning on it. It elevated, but it wasn't just balancing that moved this conversation forward. It was the fact that the state, with your help, with the help of the people up here, set up a plan and said, here's where freight and logistics needs to go. Here's how it supports our economy. Here's why the investments matter. Let's provide more flexibility to the Department of Transportation to make those investments. And that's exactly what happened. That bill empowered the planning department, which I head up, to create this plan. I worked with our members of the State Transportation Board who are here with us today. They took a look at it, they provided feedback. We worked together to create a cohesive map. You can see that this is all about interconnectivity to and from our ports, between our interstates, and it provides north-south and east-west connectivity where we don't have interstates to make sure that agriculture can get to market and that our markets have access to the world. When you zoom in, you see too that we didn't just limit this to interstates and state routes. At the Port of Savannah, we've got that thing covered up. We want to make sure that everything we can do around the port is going to be supportive. So Grange Road, it's a local road. Brampton, Jimmy DeLoach, these are local roads, but these are roads that are of state significance. And so we've lifted them off the network and said when we invest there, it's a state priority. And also too, in Metro Atlanta, we have two large intermodal yards. We want to be sure that last mile connectivity is something that we're paying attention to, not just in Savannah, but in Atlanta. So we added State Route 6 in Atlanta we're actually programming a project in the next couple of years to be sure we've got truck-friendly lanes that get us from that intermodal yard in Austell to the interstate. The one in Fairburn sits right on 85. And so basically what I've done is communicate to you, I think, really the meat of what I want you to know, which is Georgia has a plan for how we're investing in freight and logistics. It's meaningful, it's been put into action, it's happening right now with the investments that we're making this year and over the next 5 to 10 years. And in fact, that plan laid out a timeline for how we can invest all the way up through 2050. But let me draw back too and just talk about transportation generally. We're a goal-oriented organization. We have very specific goals at the department and through the governor's office to be sure that we're improving the movement of goods and people through and within the state everywhere we can, and that's a maintenance, that's an operations, that's an incident response, that's capacity, that's safety. It's the all-of-the-above approach. Expand our role as a global hub for logistics. We are, and we want to continue to expand that. It is an elevated and stated goal of the governor to be sure that we're continuing to support the industries that you're in. And we want to leverage public-private partnership and intergovernmental coordination for better infrastructure development. I'm going to touch a little bit more on that later. And of course, safety in everything we do. Every aspect of the network, we want safe. In Georgia, despite a growing population, fatalities have gone down every single year since 2005. So we maintain that as a priority, and we're making progress on it. So we got to do what we say we're going to do. We've got these goals, we've got these different categories that we're working in, we then put it on projects. How are we getting things done to make sure that we're supporting freight and logistics in Georgia? Let's zoom back in on Savannah and put the map on it. So recently, there at 307, right in the middle, we completed a grade separation to make sure that both rail and road can operate more effectively. We've got the Brampton Road connector under development. We've got Grange Road a little bit further along. We've just done the groundbreaking for Jimmy DeLoach. But as you can see, we're making all the investments we can around that Garden City terminal to make sure that product can get out to the interstates quickly and efficiently, and that there's not one or two options, but there's a multitude of options to be sure that as Georgia grows, as the port grows, and as traffic globally grows, we're able to capture as much of it as we can on that surface transportation side. You'll hear that we've got rail access as well. We want to make sure that we are maximizing these assets. So on the surface transportation side, my job is to make sure that we've got these projects ready to go when the projects are ready. In Metro Atlanta, system-to-system interchanges are key, especially for freight. I-20 at 285, we just recently opened some collector-distributor lanes. Not only did they come out a month ahead of schedule, they performed better than they were modeled. And that just goes down to the fact that we had a good design. We identified a good way to solve the problem at this location. It wasn't a full interchange reconstruction. We looked at where did a specific problem seem to be happening, used limited resources to make a very targeted investment that was huge. I touched on Jimmy DeLoach down in the Savannah area, groundbreaking last year. I-95 at State Route 21, another great example of there's a problem to be solved, limited resources, let's get something going and move the needle. We're actually going to be implementing a diverging diamond interchange. It'll be the first one outside of Metro Atlanta. It's going to be truck friendly. We've got the room to do it. And rather than spending tens of millions to redo an interchange and begin a federal environmental process, it'll take us several years. We're teeing this project up to be able to go in just a year or so and make sure that we're getting freight moving quicker, sooner, as we continue to deploy, again, limited resources to make sure we're getting the most bang for the buck. I-16 at 75 in Macon, like I said, with the help of the legislation, HB 202, that lets us prioritize these projects, we're going to get phase one going in FY16. We're wrapping up the right-of-way phase now. Let me shift over to rail real quick. In planning, like with the freight and logistics plan, we continue to look at all of our modes. It's time to update the state rail plan. We just had our kickoff meeting this month, just a few days ago. And what we're doing is we're just going to develop and articulate Georgia's updated vision for passenger and freight rail in the state. This is a key item. And again, this is not something where we want this update to sit on the shelf. We want this update to just be something nice that we wrap up and we connect the dots and we put it on a shelf. And so I would encourage you to go to our website, to stay engaged and updated on our rail plan, and to participate as you're able to make sure that we are listening to our customers, that we're listening to our road users, we're listening to our rail users, to make sure that we're lining up needs and investments. Again, we're in a world of limited resources, but we're getting a lot of bang for the buck here in Georgia, and we're doing it by making sure that we're engaging as much as we can with the private sector on how we need to be making these public investments the right way. So let me touch on funding. We deploy over $2 billion a year as a state DOT to deliver surface transportation infrastructure. We deliver, we maintain, we optimize, we actively manage we've got an award-winning active management system here in Metro Atlanta with our HERO units, with our Navigator and 511 system. But there's some uncertainty out there, especially at the federal level. If everyone here is fully aware, the federal transportation bill expires on September 30th. We're in need of a new bill starting on October 1, but the Highway Trust Fund is looking like it's actually going to be fully depleted before then. Uncertainty makes it challenging. There's some good policy, or at least the hopes for good policy in MAP 21 with respect to some of the things we can do with innovation and technology and hopefully streamlining project delivery. But as the rules continue to be made on that, really what's right in front of us is the uncertainty, and it's a challenge. Now on the other side, here at the state level, state motor fuels seem to be coming out of the recession as the state itself is coming out of the recession. $853 million in motor fuels in FY 2010, up to $1 billion in FY 13. Not as high as it was before the recession hit, but certainly higher from where it was when it dipped down to the low there in 2010. So we're seeing some strength and some continued, obviously, growth in the state of Georgia and being reflected in motor fuels and our ability to deploy resources. But here in the state, we're pretty dependent on the federal government, and so we need to be sure that we can, where we can, reduce uncertainty. But that's a real one out there. I encourage you, from your perspective and vantage point, to simply encourage that we get to a resolution on that and have a transportation bill by October 1, if not a whole lot sooner than that. Let me also touch on public-private partnerships. Public-private partnerships have been implemented in Georgia in one big specific way, and it's beginning to ripple through the system. It's having just an incredible impact. The Northwest Corridor project, which is on I-75, is the largest project Georgia's ever done. It's an $840 million project total. $600 million of that is in a construction contract. The state of Georgia was able to secure about a $270 million TIFIA loan working with the federal government. It's going to be reversible, managed lanes along I-75 north of Atlanta, 2 lanes reversible, about 30 miles of roadway, in order to deliver reliability to one of the most congested stretches of road in Georgia. But it's not just about getting the Northwest Corridor built. That's the great story of this public-private partnership. Through this design, build, finance agreement that we entered into, $60 million is actually brought in by the private sector by the contractor themselves during construction. What does that mean? It means $60 million we have over the next few years to deploy to critical infrastructure projects like I-1675 in Macon, like the project Grange Road and 21 at 95 to get that DDI in. When we're able to cash flow better and again continue to use our resources better in real time, that's opening up huge opportunities. And so just the idea that we were able to structure an agreement that left $60 million over the next 3 or 4 years in our program is substantial. What we're then seeing is we're working with local governments. It took local government support to get the Northwest Corridor going, but in smaller ways, we're seeing local governments in a very powerful transportation investment vehicle that isn't just about transportation in Georgia, called Community Improvement Districts. For those of you from Georgia, I'm sure you're familiar, but we call them CIDs, and they're self-taxing business districts that then can use those resources to make investments for the betterment of their business district. And a lot of it ends up, we're seeing, especially in Metro Atlanta, going toward getting projects ready to go. And that's what can be so challenging, getting the preliminary engineering done, working to get the right-of-way teed up. And as we don't just work with our federal partners to secure things like a TIFIA loan for a mega project, We're working with CIDs to get interchange improvement projects ready to go, working with CIDs to develop interchanges where we currently don't have them. A great example of that is I was just visiting with one of our partners down along I-95 at the Belfast Siding interchange. Federal government approves an IJR. We need to get this project ready to go. It'll continue to support the kind of growth we want at the port. And we're working with private partners locally and the local government to do the PE and to do the right-of-way and get this project teed up and ready to go. And then GDOT's going to be a partner on getting that construction funding over the hump. Again, it's another example of continuing to work with the private sector to listen to what are the needs out there to help Georgia grow and moving things forward. Lastly, the Georgia Transportation Investment Act. It was a statewide referendum in 2012. It was passed in 3 regions in middle Georgia, and it's representing additional investment in Georgia that we didn't have before, and there's investment on those all critical freight corridors as well. So US 27 on the western side of the state, key for north-south connectivity, State Route 17, north-south on the eastern side of the state, and then US 1 in Toombs County. 3 critical freight corridor projects, new investment coming on with local support, not federal and not even state, but the locals saying these are important to us. And so it's all about creating a big team effort to get over the funding hump, but we're making a lot of progress here in Georgia. That's all I've got. Again, thank you very much for being here. Thanks for what you do in the industry, and appreciate it.
Good job. We definitely have a great responsibility as the public sector to be a better partner to private industry, and Toby is leading a great effort in that. So let's switch from infrastructure and talk about some of the private industry that uses our roads. Please help me welcome Ed Crowell from the Georgia Motor Trucking Association.
Thanks, sir.
There you go.
Good morning, and thank you, Paige. Thank you to the sponsors for having us here again. It's a pleasure to be back with you. Appreciate it, appreciate the opportunity, and I think you've already seen something that you're going to hear more of and see more of as this panel goes on. There's probably no state where all the modes get it better than Georgia, and all the modes work together better than here in Georgia. Paige asked me to talk a little about state issues and national issues, and we're going to do that. But you'll hear a theme, you'll hear me echo some of the things Toby just said about the fact that our state understands the importance of logistics and has a real commitment to doing that successfully. We value our work and our partnership with the rails, with the ports, with all the other modes, and with the state government. Let me get into some of this. Let's see. And we value our technology. There we go. All right, just briefly, we have some, and feel free to cheer for Georgia if you'd like. Thank you. It's cheap applause, but I'll take what I can get. We have some national challenges, and we have some state opportunities. And I don't want to spend too much time on that, but just let's run through a few things on the national level. We have chronic national issues, and most of you in this room understand what they are. There are infrastructure issues. We hear about them all the time, but they don't seem to be acted on. We have a lack of leadership, or what I call a lack of aspiration. There's no one at the national level articulating how we develop the ports nationwide, how we develop the systems nationwide, how we make the United States continually more competitive. It's just missing. Now, it's in contrast to what you'll hear here in the state of Georgia. We also have a lack of consensus. When you have a lack of leadership, you often have a lack of consensus, and there's a real lack of consensus on how to address things at the federal level. And of course, you've seen 2-year highway bills. Well, 2-year highway bills don't cut it. We need 6-year plans. We need longer-term plans for full development. But the thing I want to focus on today at the national level is what I call the acute issues, and that is mainly regulatory hyperactivity. The American Transportation Research Institute does a survey every year of what are the top issues facing the trucking industry. And this year, just the top 5 are hours of service, CSA, and I'll come back to that in a minute, and the driver shortage, which is a good thing to see in the top 5 issues, the economy generally, and the ELD mandate. Now, for those of you who don't stay up on your trucking acronyms, ELDs used to be EOBRs. They were electronic onboard recorders, now they're electronic logging devices. I don't know if that improves them, but they changed them. Hours of service. The reason hours of service is an issue is twofold. One is that it's been changed relatively rapidly over the last 10 years. The hours of service for the trucking industry changed basically twice in the first 70 years they existed. They've changed about 4 times since 2003. Now, not only is it difficult for the industry to adapt to those changes, but think about the relationships, those of you on the shipping side. The trucker used to be able to pick up at this time and deliver at this time, and now they've got to change that. The other thing is that relates directly to the driver shortage. Studies have shown that the latest change in hours of service has probably cut driver pay anywhere from 8 to 20%. Now, that's a huge impact on the people who are driving, and it's a huge impact on our ability to get and retain good drivers. In fact, I was talking to a couple of trucking folk this morning, and they told me the first thing that comes out of their mouth is, business is good, but we got to find the drivers. We got to find people to put in those seats, and it's harder to do when the hours of service limit the individual's ability to make his compensation or her compensation without any particularly shown benefit to safety. And that's the big thing. The hours of service between 2005 and 2011 were showing real safety improvements. They were changed in 2011 with no evidence of safety improvements, and changed again in 2013, again with no evidence of safety improvement, but with huge hits to productivity. CSA is another one. CSA, when it first began, was the Comprehensive Safety Analysis. And we'll come back and talk about this a little bit later too, but the Comprehensive Safety Analysis has now become compliance, safety, and accountability. Compliance period, safety period, accountability period. A lot of you on the shipping side now look at CSA scores to try to determine how good a trucking company is. Okay? I'm here to tell you that that can be a big mistake, and we'll get to that in a moment. But the simple fact is, CSA scores are not safety ratings. They changed the regulation, they changed the way things look, but the regulations, the law still says that a safety rating comes only from a compliance review. So what that's done is just roil the industry, cause all sorts of issues that truckers have a hard time explaining. There are 7 different areas where a trucker is rated under CSA, and try to explain to a shipper that you're over in 2 of them, but it doesn't mean you're not an unsafe carrier. All right? So these are the kind of national issues, and they all have some regulatory impact. And the acute problem we face in our industry is this regulatory hyperactivity. We talked about this, about the safety benefits, about the CSA cost, and in fact, I'll make mention the GAO, General Accounting Office, has now come out with a report, and the DOT just yesterday came out with a report saying CSA is full of flaws, and we've got to do something about it. But meanwhile, we continue to leave it out there, and we continue to rate trucking companies with it. These things are causing uncertainty, and in that uncertainty for our industry, and for yours if you use trucks, it's impeding productivity, it's impeding growth, and in some cases, it's impeding safety. Now, if you were here last year, you know that when you think of trucking, you think of literature, right? Yeah, truckers are known for that, our love of great literature. So we got to do a little Shakespeare here. I'm sure you all recognize, where is he? Richard III. Y'all recognize Richard III, all right? Wonderful guy, and you've all seen the play, right? William Shakespeare's play, Richard III. Some of you were forced to in high school, I know. Here's the point about Richard III. For about 350 or 400 years, Richard III was described by Shakespeare and by other historians as a deformed, despicable, despisable person, probably the worst person to ever rule the Kingdom of England. Terrible guy. Locked up 2 little cousins in the Tower of London, eventually had them executed, all these terrible things. Okay? If you remember the line from Shakespeare, "Now is the winter of our discontent," that wasn't about Atlanta traffic, that was Richard III. Okay? Here's the thing. If you pull out your phone and you Google up the greatest detective novels of all time, and you can do that, I don't mind, but if you do that, you'll find at the top of that list, or near the top of that list, a book called The Daughter of Time by a woman named Josephine Tay. Now, this was 400 years later. Josephine Tay takes a fictional book and uses it to look at the real history of Richard III, and the results, as she goes through and examines the history, is that a lot of what Shakespeare said and a lot of what English historians said was total fiction, totally made up. And that Richard III, actually, when he was alive, was considered a pretty good, pretty enlightened king. He had nothing to do with the demise of his nephews in the Tower of London. It was the guy that took the throne from him that killed them. Okay? But his reputation was ruined because nobody stopped to take the time to look at what was really going on. Now, that's a long-winded way to get some literature into this discussion, but the point is simply this: you've got to take the time. And the quote here from Francis Bacon, "Truth is the daughter of time, not authority." That is, you can't just issue a regulation and decide that that makes everything right. You've got to take the time to look at the data. You've got to take the time to learn what the impact is before you go off and change the rules yet again. That's the most acute federal problem facing the trucking industry, is that they're issuing regulations, they're not taking the time, they're not dealing with strong, good data, and they're not really dealing with what the issues are. Let me give you one example. FMCSA, when they issued the new hours of service, claimed that it would save the industry $133 million. That's the green bar. The red bar is the actual impact of the hours of service now that they've been in place for a while. That's a $300 million difference in what the Fed said was going to happen, what the industry's actually experiencing. Okay? Well, if you're a trucker, you'll be excited to know that the hours of service are being looked at yet again. So we shall see. But that's what you have to do. You have to look at real data and what's the real impact. Here's another one. We talked about CSA. There's compliance, safety, accountability. Okay? 7 different ways to rate a trucking company. And some of you have rated your trucking companies using CSA. Well, studies showed once it was in place that at least 2 of those basics, 2 of those behavioral analysis areas, the better your score, the more likely you were to be in a crash. Now think about that. You're looking for a trucking company that has a perfect CSA rating. And they come in and they say, hey, we got great ratings here on these substance and alcohol ratings and on these driver fitness ratings. They got great ratings. But when you study the real world results, the better the rating, the more likely those drivers are to be involved in a crash. I'd say that's a flaw in the system. Well, the DOT's General Accounting Office agrees it's a flaw in the system, and we're hoping to try to get that straightened out. But that's just part of the problem. Now, let me tell you why there's a state advantage out of all that, okay? When you get into this sort of constant impact of regulation after regulation after regulation, it creates this regulatory fog. It creates this haze. And truckers will tell you, it often leaves you perplexed about what to do next, what changes to make, what shifts to make, how to plan, because you don't know how the regulations are changing next. The silver lining in that is that it affects everyone in the nation the same. It may be bad, but it affects a trucker based in Colorado the same as it does one in Connecticut, as it does one in Florida, as it does one in South Carolina, Wyoming, Georgia, Texas, wherever. The difference then becomes what goes on at the state level. And that's where Georgia really shines. That's where the sort of thing you've heard about from Toby, Carr already, and you'll hear from others, makes the real difference. And that's why Georgia is the place to do logistics and the place to base a trucking company. We have great infrastructure already. You just saw that there's very thoughtful, well-developed plans on continuing to improve it, continuing to build it, and ways to make sure that freight flows freely throughout this state. We have a taxation industry here for the trucking, taxation regime here for the trucking industry that is a little mismatched, it's a little antiquated, but we've made great strides in fixing it. You heard Toby talk about the way we fixed how we fund freight corridors. Well, last year, right before we finished, right at this meeting, the state legislature was about to change property taxes on trucks, make it much more competitive. They went through with that. And beginning January of this year, we have a much more competitive tax environment for the trucking industry, which makes it much more palatable, much more worthwhile to base your business here. We have some fuel tax issues on the table. We're going to try to use those fuel tax issues to do more for the infrastructure. Obviously, the bureaucracy, and I don't mean that as a pejorative term, our state government and all its different agencies, they're working together and they're constantly working to upgrade their ability to service the industry, to service the whole logistics industry, and to be good partners, probably in a way you won't find in any other state. And finally, you heard from the governor this morning, you've seen it, if you've been here before, you've seen it over the years, that this state has a leadership dedicated to logistics like few others. That's the silver lining. The federal issues, the things we have to deal with at that level, everybody has to deal with. The advantage we have is we get to deal with it with the state of Georgia, a state that's dedicated to making logistics work. Now, I showed you a few charts. I want to tell you they all came from the American Transportation Research Institute. Great people. They do good work. Feel free to look them up. They have this nasty habit. They give away most everything they do. So you may find something valuable there that you can make use of. And with that, I will say thank you and look forward to questions.
Thank you, Ed. Great job. So let's switch gears or change tracks and move from the trucking side into the railroad industry. With that, we have Charles Tarbutton, who's the current chair of the Georgia Railroad Association, and I would be remiss if I didn't also mention he's also the current board of the Georgia Department of Economic Development. Thank you.
Thank you. Well, good morning, and I want to add my thanks to Paige for the opportunity to speak here today, as well as for his leadership in the transportation logistics industry and for highlighting the strategic importance of this industry to the future prosperity of Georgia. I want to spend a moment talking about the rail network overall in the United States. The United States rail network is the safest, most affordable, and most reliable freight rail system in the world. There are 7 Class 1 railroads, and working in cooperation with some 550 short line and regional railroads, we comprise a system of over 140,000 route miles and provide high-quality jobs to over 180,000 rail employees. The Class 1 railroads are recognizable brands. There are 2 here today, Norfolk Southern and CSX. And they serve multiple states across systems of tens of thousands of miles long. America's short line railroads, on the other hand, are decidedly small businesses. We serve relatively small geographic areas and connect 13,000 local customers to the nation's rail network. The first priority of railroads is safety. It's the first priority of not only the companies but all rail employees. And today's freight railroads are safer than ever before and safer than other modes of transportation and other major industries. While the challenge of safety is never ending, I want to say that it's a good news story. Tremendous gains have been made in all areas of rail safety. Since 1980, employee injuries are down 85%, train accidents are down 80%, and highway grade crossing accidents are down 82%. The rail safety gains that began in the 1980s are a direct result of regulatory reform. By the 1970s, and some of you in this room were involved in the rail industry in the 1970s, you know that excessive and destructive regulation had brought America's railroads to the brink of ruin. At that time, bankruptcies were common, tracks and rolling stock were in deplorable condition for lack of reinvestment, and the economy suffered because railroads were unable to provide the quality service that rail customers required. Fortunately, in 1980, policymakers, railroads, and customers working together passed landmark regulatory reform that permitted railroads with federal regulatory oversight the flexibility to decide what routes to use, what services to provide, and what prices to charge. This was based on market demand instead of federal regulatory fiat, which had been the prior regulatory structure. This is what has happened since that regulatory reform. In the years since the Staggers Act, railroads have been able to capture huge productivity gains, and much of these efficiency gains have been passed on to rail customers in the form of more competitive rates, which in turn has resulted in increased volume for the railroads. Adjusted for inflation, average U.S. freight rail rates are 44% lower today than they were when the Staggers Act passed in 1980. And average rail rates in the U.S. are the lowest in the world, help keeping America's industry more competitive in a global marketplace. Railroads are investing in the future because of a balanced regulatory environment has encouraged that. In fact, we're investing at record levels. That money is going into improving infrastructure, equipment, and technology. The investment continues to drive gains in safety, efficiency, service, and capacity. Last year, the railroads reinvested just under $26 billion and plan to invest over $26 billion in 2014. In addition, the railroads have hired over 16,000 new employees in 2013 and expect to hire another 12,000 this year. As you can see from this slide, freight railroads are highly capital intensive. As an industry, we spend about 17% of annual revenue in CapEx. That's about 5 times the average manufacturer, which spends in the neighborhood of about 3%. I'll show you a brief slide of where some of this money is going. Here's an example of a timbering and surfacing gang in the process of cross tie replacement, which is a major part of track maintenance costs. Remember now that America's railroads are private, for-profit corporations that operate overwhelmingly on infrastructure that we own, build, maintain, and pay for ourselves. By contrast, other modes of transportation operate on infrastructure that is almost exclusively publicly owned and publicly financed. In addition to providing safe and affordable transportation, railroads provide a number of public benefits. Here in this slide, you can see that fuel efficiency for railroads has been climbing steadily. Last year, freight railroads on average moved 1 ton of freight 476 miles on 1 gallon of diesel fuel, double the efficiency of 30 years ago. Greenhouse gas emissions are directly related to fuel consumption, and thus greater fuel efficiency means less emissions and a lower carbon footprint, which is important not only to carriers but shippers alike. Studies show that highway congestion costs our economy some $120 billion per year. And Toby, this is one of my favorite congested areas. I see it a lot. This is I-20 at 285 eastbound. One train, on the other hand, can carry the freight of several hundred trucks, creating additional highway capacity, postponing maintenance and repair costs for roads and bridges, and potentially delaying expensive highway expansion projects. That's especially important given the funding pressure that exists today. So what are the railroads carrying? Basically, it's all the commodities that our economy depends on. Energy that powers everything we do, farm and forest products, minerals and construction materials, chemicals, autos and equipment, and consumer goods of every kind. In 2013, the railroads handled about 14.5 million carloads of freight. This is well off the peak of 2006, as you can see. That peak was around 17.5 million carloads. This reduction is due in no small part to substantially lower coal volumes over the last several years, which incidentally still make up about 40% of industry car loadings. Intermodal volumes, on the other hand, have surpassed their pre-recession peaks and are running still at record pace. In 2013, the railroads handled about 12.8 million intermodal units. So let's dial in a little closer to what's going on in Georgia. Georgia, as you know, is served by 2 Class I railroads, Norfolk Southern and CSX, and 23 short line railroads. We collectively operate about 4,700 route miles and serve almost 900 different freight stations, 30% of which are served by short line railroads. In 2012, we handled approximately 190 million tons of freight from, to, and through Georgia. We provide high-wage jobs to about 7,500 Georgians. This will give you a little more information about the presence of the Class I railroads in Georgia, but Georgia is a key state for both Norfolk Southern and CSX. They have substantial operations throughout the state, and particularly here in Metro Atlanta. Atlanta is home to Norfolk Southern's operating headquarters that houses their National Customer Service Center, their centralized yard operations, IT, crew management, mechanical engineering, the list goes on. They have a very large presence here. Norfolk Southern and CSX have their system-wide training facilities here in Metro Atlanta, which means that all new hires for both companies come here for training. They operate major rail yards here in Georgia. This is a list of several of them. Atlanta is home to Inman Yard, which is Norfolk Southern's main class yard here, and to Tilford Yard and Halsey Yard, which are big operations for CSX. And then Norfolk Southern has a very large class yard at Macon and CSX in Waycross. Give you a little bit of an idea of the scope and scale of these operations. This is the massive combined facilities of CSX and Norfolk Southern just west of downtown. You can see on the right of this, on the left of this picture is CSX's Tilford Yard, and on the right is Norfolk Southern's Inman Yard, and in the middle is the intermodal operations at Inman Yard. Here's another picture of train activities at Inman Yard. In this photo, you can see a unit grain train on the left, a unit coal train in the middle, and an automotive train on the right, giving you a flavor of the commerce that flows through Georgia. Here's a great photo of CSX's locomotive servicing area at Tilford Yard, again with the city of Atlanta skyline just in the back. And this is the receiving yard at Brosnan Yard, Norfolk Southern's main class yard in Macon, Georgia. These trains have recently arrived, and the cars that you see in this photo will be classified in the main yard and then forwarded from there and other trains. And as you can see in the foreground, they're carloads of kaolin and wood chips, which are two of Georgia's abundant natural resources. And this is a photo of CSX's massive rice yard in Waycross. It is the largest rail classification yard in the Southeast and spans nearly 1,000 acres with 160 different tracks. There are 9 intermodal terminals in Georgia. CSX and Norfolk Southern each operate 3, two each here in Metro Atlanta and 1 at their respective yards in Savannah. Cordele Intermodal Services operates a facility in Cordele serving southwest Georgia, southeast Alabama, and the panhandle of Florida. And GPA has 2 on-dock facilities at Garden City, which I know Curtis will talk more about in a moment. But you can get a sense of the scale of these operations. Here's a picture of intermodal operations at Inman Yard. And to Ed's earlier point, the railroads and the trucking industry do work very closely together in a number of ways. We are part of a system. And while we compete in many markets, we complement each other in many other markets. Every container, for instance, in this photo has either a first or a last mile truck haul or both. This is an aerial view of CSX's Fairburn intermodal operations. CSX has 2 operations here in Metro Atlanta, Fairburn, and then at their Halsey Yard just east of downtown. And here is an example of the operations in Cordele. This facility is just east of I-75. It is served by the Heart of Georgia Railroad, one of Georgia's 23 short lines, and in conjunction with the Georgia Central, they provide service to and from the Port of Savannah. And then a shot of the Mason Intermodal Facility at Savannah. This facility is on dock, as is the second facility. This one is served by Norfolk Southern, and then the Chatham Terminal, which is also on dock at the port, is served by CSX. There are 8 railroad-owned bulk transfer facilities in Georgia. CSX operates 4 transflow facilities at Atlanta, Augusta, Dalton, and Savannah, and CSX operates 3 TBT facilities in Doraville, Augusta, and Dalton, and our company operates a bulk transfer facility in Sandersville. There are also numerous other privately owned terminals, warehouses, and reload centers across the state that receive in freight by rail and then distribute it and deliver it to the customer by truck. And as you can see, bulk transfer and distribution is another example where the strengths of freight rail are combined with the strengths of the trucking industry to provide a tailored service to meet the needs of a customer. There are 23 short lines in Georgia, and incidentally, the third largest owner of route miles is the state of Georgia. The state of Georgia owns about 500 miles of right-of-way, primarily in northwest Georgia and southwest Georgia. And those lines are operated under lease by short lines for the most part. Had the state not preserved these rail lines, customers and communities would have been cut off from the national rail network, jeopardizing existing jobs in those markets and diminishing future economic development opportunities. Short lines operate according to the same rules, the same laws, the same federal regulations as Class 1s. We operate with the same equipment as our much larger brothers do, yet we are most definitely small businesses. Most of us have just a handful of employees. We operate primarily on light-density branch lines that more often than not were spun off by the Class 1 railroads some years ago because they determined that they could no longer economically operate on those lines. As a result, many of the branch lines that make up the short line network in Georgia have some amount of deferred maintenance to tracks and bridges, which will require future reinvestment in order to continue to provide service on these lines. And so here are a few of the short line operators in Georgia. Well, I want to spend a moment in conclusion talking about the priorities of the freight industry in Georgia. The U.S. DOT forecasts that total freight tonnage in the U.S. will increase by over 50% in the next 25 years. That will require substantial new investment in all types of freight infrastructure, including rail. Key to this for the Class 1 railroads is a balanced regulatory environment that permits them to earn a rate of return sufficient for reinvestment. For most short lines, on the other hand, additional funding sources will be needed to maintain and upgrade existing rail lines, and there is an opportunity for the state to play a proactive role in ensuring that that comes about. Georgia is one of a very few states that still charge a sales tax on locomotive diesel fuel. The 4% tax amounts to about $15 million a year and diverts funds that would otherwise be able to be reinvested in rail infrastructure. Instead, this money is used to build highways, which we feel, and courts in other states incidentally have found to be discriminatory. There are also efforts underway in Georgia and at the federal level to weaken truck size and weight limits. That's not necessarily a good thing for the trucking industry. It's better for some trucking customers, but we feel it pits shippers' interests against the public interest, and it also increases costs for railroads in that it accelerates wear and tear on our grade crossings where we intersect with the highways, and creates safety issues for us as well. So we believe that current laws are a reasonable balance to serve customer interest and the public interest. So that's all I have. I appreciate the opportunity to be with you today, and I look forward to questions later. Thank you.
Good job. Thanks, Charles. So now we're going to take a step off the ground and hear from Miguel Southwell with Hartsfield-Jackson International Airport. Miguel, the floor is yours. Thank you.
Good morning, ladies and gentlemen. Thank you, Paige, for having us here this morning and also for arranging this spectacular conference. I can't remember attending a conference with this many people. It just goes to show you the interest of this community and the state of Georgia and how important transportation is to the development of the state. This morning I'm going to cover 5 topics. We'll start at the 30,000-foot level. We'll talk about challenges facing the industry as a whole. Then we'll talk about, let me just go back a little bit, I think. Okay. Then we'll sort of come down a little lower. We'll talk about some highlights at Hartsfield-Jackson Atlanta International Airport. We'll talk about some opportunities and threats that are facing the airport locally, and how we can, finally we'll talk about how we'll capitalize on some of those opportunities and even threats. Okay. There are really about 3 to 4 threats facing the industry. I'll cover them very quickly. One, of course, you know, is high fuel costs. As recently as 2003, the airline industry spent approximately $44 billion a year on fuel. Last year, that number multiplied 5 times to some $214 billion in only 10 years. From $44 billion to $214 billion in fuel costs in only 10 years. That now represents, fuel costs actually now represents about 44%, actually 30% of an airline's cost. That doubled what it was 10 years ago. Labor cost is second, of course, which is hovering about 20%, but about 30% of an airline's cost actually is now represented by fuel. Another threat that's facing the industry, believe it or not, and something is a little out of whack here. Delta Airlines actually, so all local headquartered company, has addressed the fuel costs by dealing with it directly through actually purchasing an oil refinery. Now, this is a kind of drastic step for a company to take. They actually purchased an oil refinery. We can expect to see more of that continuing in the future, even as the manufacturers and the industry are looking at actually finding other ways, such as producing more efficient engines. But it's simply not, those kinds of measures are simply not keeping up with the escalating costs. This year, we have some good news, because for the first time in about 10 years, we can expect those costs to actually go down, only by about $1 billion. We expect the airlines to spend about $230 billion this year, as opposed to the $231 that they spent last year. The other challenge that is facing the industry is the high cost of airport infrastructure. It takes a lot of money to construct buildings at airports. It takes a lot of money to construct ramps and taxiways. Countries across the world are dealing with it in different ways. In the case of Brazil, which has about 32 airports that it needs to upgrade, modernize, they're going through a solicitation process, but it's the only country that is actually doing it the way they're doing it, which is they're actually auctioning the development rights of their airports. It offers some opportunities for airport construction companies, but it also offers an opportunity for other airports, particularly the European airports, that are actually joining the construction companies, because once the airport is constructed, there's a contract that goes along with that construction where the construction company will manage the airport for a period of 25 to 30 years. Clearly, airport construction companies like Bechtel know nothing about managing airports, so they team up with airport operators to actually manage the airports over that period of time. Then you have China. In China, of course, the government is using its own money. The Asian airports now set the world standard for airports. If you've been to Shanghai, If you've been to Hong Kong or Seoul, Korea, amazing airports. We no longer set the standards for airports. In fact, we're sort of struggling to keep up. And finally, you have India, which has chosen an option that is in between. They do have solicitations, but instead they're requests for proposals, meaning it's not the highest bidder like it is in Brazil. It is actually the company or the team that comes with the best program for the country, that combines the experience of running the airport with the type of offer to share the revenue with the particular company. So the developer shares the revenue with the particular country. We have at Hartsfield-Jackson, well, let me mention one other challenge, and that is a shortage of pilots. And I know that would surprise many of you. The industry has a severe shortage of pilots. This started, we believe, back in 2000, when 9/11 occurred, 2001. After that incident, that major crisis and tragedy, the airline industry sought to hire pilots that had a college background. Many of you remember the days where you graduated from high school and you went straight into flight school. Or you went into the Army, and then you started working for a commercial airline. Well, the airline industry after 9/11 determined that it wanted more leaders in the cockpit. And so they decided that they wanted to recruit instead pilots that had a college degree. That makes it extremely expensive, an extremely expensive prospect for you to actually spend money for college, then spend money for flight school before you can actually get a job with a commercial airline. And therefore, it made it very unattractive as a profession. We're now reeling from that, and what is actually happening is that many of the Asian carriers are actually delaying delivery of planes because they simply can't find pilots. As far as the airport outlook, the airport remains the #1 airport in the world with 94.5 million passengers. The closest airport, Beijing, is still 8 million passengers behind us. We do not expect, we expect to continue to hold that title because even as China develops new airports, we believe that will dilute the number of passengers that are actually coming through Beijing because it's a vast program of new airport development in China. We, as an airport, have many opportunities ahead of us. But first, I want to talk about the challenges that we're facing. We have just completed a $5 billion master plan. We have new runways. We have a new international terminal. But just as that is being completed, and quite frankly, we have another $800 million of spending and capital improvements to do. We're facing with developing a new master plan. We don't know what those capital projects are going to bring, but as you might imagine, it's likely to be probably north of $4 billion. In addition to the master plan, we are having to, those of you in the audience who have relatives who are engineers, they tell you that before you build new facilities, you need to repair and renew the ones you have, and then you replace them if they're broken. Most of Hartsfield-Jackson Atlanta International Airport was built in 1930. The concourses, many of the concourses are quite dim. Much of the new construction of airport terminals, most of them you can see clearly through the outside, mostly glass walls as opposed to the solid walls. So we're going to have to look at a significant sort of update of the current terminal, and we anticipate that's going to be about $100 million to do before we get to the new master plan of $4 billion. We also have another challenge before us. It's really not a challenge, it is more of a negotiation. Just about every 30 years, an airport has to negotiate with its airlines to discuss, in this case it's called a Central Passenger Terminal Complex Agreement. It is that agreement that codifies the relationship between the City of Atlanta and the airlines that serve the airport. We will have a successful negotiation because the airlines, understandably, they want one thing. They want to make sure that over the next 20 to 30 years that they have the lowest cost possible to operate at that airport. We as a community should want to be and actually have an obligation to operate the most competitive airport there is in the country. Therefore, our interests are aligned. Necessarily, if you talk about a new capital program and you talk about a new agreement with the airlines where we will need to generate additional revenues to make sure their costs, that is non-aviation revenues from things like parking and concessions, to make sure that their costs are kept low, necessarily you have to look at non-traditional sources of revenues. The airport possesses vast amount of real estate outside of the fence lines that we're working to lease or develop. We're working to develop an expanded duty-free program. We have abdicated for many years much of what New York and Atlanta and Miami and other gateway cities pursue constantly. For example, tourism medicine. Georgia has some of the finest medical facilities. You cannot visit South America, Central America, without seeing hospitals from New York and Miami marketing their facilities. We have tremendous medical facilities. We need to be taking advantage of that, working with our economic development agencies. We have fantastic educational facilities. We need to be working with our partners from the Convention Visitors Bureau to make sure that we also market tourism education, because we have fine colleges and universities here in Georgia as well. Finally, we like to think of ourselves as being in the air transportation industry. The fact of the matter is, we're in the economic development business. An airport, seaport, when we say that airports and seaports are the economic engines of our community, we really are in the economic development business. Yes, every day we work to keep you safe and secure because we know that you won't get on an aircraft unless you take your safety for granted. So that's what we focus on every day. But at the end of the day, we're in the economic development business. And nowhere is the opportunity greater than what I'm about to share with you in a moment. This is a slide from Airbus. Airbus, of course, sells planes. But they sell planes where people can afford to purchase airline tickets. And if you look at this slide, you'll see that with the advanced economies, which are 31 countries, as defined by Airbus, of course, the usual suspects, the United States, Germany, etc. Airbus pointed out that only 15% of the world's population with access to air transportation live in those 31 countries. Compare that to the BRIC countries, Brazil, Russia, India, and China. Only 4 countries, but 42% of the world's population live in those countries. But, of course, for Airbus, it's just people. What they want to focus their attention on are the people who can afford to purchase airline tickets, and they call those people the middle class. They call those people the middle class. According to their data, in 2010, the middle class in Asia was approximately 500 million people, 525 million people. With the advent of Apple and all these companies going to Asia, people who were poor then are now going to move into that middle class. And Airbus estimate that in only 20 years, from 2010 to 2030, 20 years, the middle class in Asia will multiply 6 times to 3.2 billion people. The middle class in Asia will multiply 6 times to 3.2 billion people. If that doesn't impress you, look at what they're predicting for the United States, North America. In North America, they estimate that that middle class will fall from 338 million people in 2010 to 322 million people in 2030, according to Airbus's statistics. And yet Asia will multiply 6 times. Folks, I don't know about you, but that gets me excited, because what it says is that we have an obligation to link the state of Georgia to those fast-growing economies. We can't wait to have conversations every day about how we're going to link this state to those commercial centers, those rapidly growing commercial centers. Until they perfect the beam me up Scotty technology, folks, the outlook for air transportation is good. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Miguel. Thank you very much. So last but certainly not least, let's switch from one of our major transportation hubs here that we're very fortunate to have in the state of Georgia to another, to our seaport. Please help me welcome Curtis Foltz, the Executive Director of Georgia Ports Authority.
Thank you. All right, good morning, everybody. Before I get started, a couple of opening comments. Miguel, you said we don't set the standard for airports around the world. Well, unfortunately, I fly through Atlanta Hartsfield too often, and I also fly to Shanghai, and I fly to Tokyo, and I fly to Seoul and Paris de Gaulle Airport. You handle me better than anybody else in the world, so well done. Ed made an opening comment about Georgia gets it. And those of you that have heard me speak before recognize, or at least understand, that we at the ports feel exactly the same way. I can tell you, and I've worked in really every region of the United States in the port or transportation sector, and you won't find another state where the CEO of the state, Governor Deal, if you bump into him anywhere without notes, can tell you the whole storyline about how important logistics are to Georgia and Georgia's economic development. You won't find another state where Georgia Economic Development team doesn't work or works as closely as they do with the governor's office, with Department of Transportation, with those of us in the port sector, with the rail industry, with the trucking industry that we do in Georgia. So Team Georgia gets it. Hopefully most of you are here because of that. And just very quickly, for those that are all in the back, if you can't see me on this screen up here on the stage, your eyes are fine. But if you can't see this massive screen in the back, you need to go to the doctor real quickly. All right, I'm going to tell you about the ports. I'm going to try to do it as rapid fire as I possibly can. Maybe take about 10 minutes. My time is almost already up. But run you through it. Hopefully you know most about what the ports do. We have deepwater ports in Savannah and Brunswick. We have an inland port location in Bainbridge, and we own an asset in Columbus. But our main port activities are obviously on the coast in Brunswick and in Savannah. This is a purpose-built forest products terminal that we have in Brunswick. So as we look to trade around the world in forest products, a lot of those coming from Georgia, we want to make sure we've got first-class facilities to handle it, and this is a dedicated facility down in Brunswick, Georgia. Our 800-pound gorilla in Brunswick is our Colonel's Island terminal. Just so that you know, last year we handled about 635,000 automobiles, new automobiles, through this facility. The second largest auto processing port in the United States. the largest import of new automobiles in the United States. We imported about 500,000 automobiles through there. It has grown exponentially over the last 3 years, and we expect it to continue to grow. Also in this facility, we support the ag industry. We have about 1 million ton a year agri-bulk handling facility, really moving products through the entire eastern half of the United States. And about half of that area is still to be developed. Moving up to Savannah, we've got a general cargo terminal. It's our ocean terminal facility. Really handles a little bit of everything. So if you want to ship crude rubber, steel, again, forest products, primarily for export, heavy machinery. We're one of Caterpillar's #1 export terminals in the United States, shipping around the world. John Deere, JCB, and kind of on and on. That's what this facility is dedicated for, and it's separate from our container facility, which makes it just that much more attractive and marketable for us in the global arena and from an economic development standpoint. And our largest facility is our container facility in Savannah. It's our Garden City terminal. It's the single largest container terminal in the United States, single largest. In that single facility, we're the 4th most containers of any port complex in the United States, and it's been the fastest growing in the country for the last decade. Quick highlight of our first 8 months of this fiscal year. We run the same fiscal year as the state of Georgia does, so July through June. We'll be sharing this with our board this upcoming Sunday, so you're getting a peek view of it. But for the first 8 months, the ports are extremely healthy considering this kind of anemic economic world we currently live in. Our total tonnage, so everything we do, up 7.6%. We've exceeded the 2 million, hopefully this will be the only acronym I use in this presentation, TEUs, 20-foot equivalent units, 2 million TEUs for the first 8 months of the year, up 6.2%. 439,000 auto and machinery units. So off a banner year last year, that business is up 5.6%. 6.5% increase in our intermodal activity. Our great Class 1 rail partners, Charles referred to him, Norfolk Southern and CSX, have helped us grow that business up 6.5%. So Toby, we're continuing to try to transfer more and more of that business from the road to the rail, but still a great split. About 80% of our business is moved with trucks, Ed, and about 20% on rail, and we see that percentage growing. And then on the bulk side of the business, up 6.6%. So what I'd tell you is, all in all, Georgia's port business is exceedingly healthy right now, or at least for the first 8 months of the year. Many of you know about the impact of the ports throughout the state, but I think it's important to understand, we're called Georgia Ports Authority because we touch really every corner of the state and certainly beyond the state of Georgia. The economic impacts of the ports, we become a gateway for commerce through the Southeast. But if you just dial in Georgia, last studies done by the Terry College of Business say we represent about 350,000 jobs throughout the state and about $18.5 billion of income for Georgians every year. These are the different jobs that they identify throughout the state, and I think of interest there to most of you will see that the largest impact of our ports in the state of Georgia is Atlanta. Atlanta is our New York City of the South. You can't move Atlanta, Georgia. Our ports are closer to Atlanta by 100 miles than any other port in the United States. So we want to work closely with the state to make sure that connectivity and the logistics that provides, that geographic proximity to serve that demographic strength and take advantage of it in Atlanta, we want to do as good as we can at growing that business. Just a snapshot of how important demographics, logistics, distribution center network throughout the state of Georgia is to serving, again, the demographic strength in the Southeast. Southeast is the fastest growing region of the country, was identified in the last census, and is expected to be for at least the next half a century. So that's why Page, and the role that he serves in kind of pulling all the logistics together for the state of Georgia, why it's so critically important to us throughout the state that helps serve what he's trying to do. Just a quick slide. We're very proud of how we've not just risen with the tide in the country in terms of our growth and the resulting economic impact of it, but we have taken market share from others. And unlike what many would think, that market share really hasn't been, we haven't taken that from our friendly state to the north. This business has been derived by finding better transportation solutions from, instead of shipping goods through the West Coast, great service customers and partners of ours like the Home Depot that is setting up here, they've elected to serve that demographic on the East Coast through Georgia. And we're home now to many of those large companies. But it's allowed us to grow at about 7.1% on a compounded annual basis over the last 10 years, and by far the fastest growing port in the country over that 10-year period of time. If you ship goods or want to trade in commerce around the world, this is just a snapshot of the different container services, container ships they're calling our ports. We are basically where New York, New Jersey is on this map in terms of the number of services. Every single week we have 37 container ships serving our container facilities and really driving a lot of that growth that you've seen. This is our market area that we want to take care of. So when you think about gateway of commerce, this is the area that we're serving. Every day our commercial group is out tapping customers within this region, this shaded area that you see on the map. It represents almost half of the U.S. population, about 44% of the population. So we've worked primarily with our two Class 1 rail partners, CSX and Norfolk Southern, to put together a service network to reach into this area extremely efficiently. So every day we're serving trains and sending trains out to these key markets. We talked about CapEx. I think both Charles and Miguel talked about the capital requirements. We will spend as the Port Authority, not as the state of Georgia. They have other expenditure requirements, but inside of our fence lines, which is our responsibility, we'll spend $1.4 billion over the next 10 years improving velocity, improving efficiencies, improving densities to better service our customers long term. We've continued that spend even through the economic downturn. So in 2008, during the 7, 8, and even into 9 Great Recession, our board continued to support a CapEx spend of about $100 million a year. And I think it's interesting right now, and I won't name the others, but if you look at the top 6 ports in the United States, every other port other than our port is having fairly severe congestion or service issues right now. Fortunately, we're not, and I'd like to think it's because we've continued to invest during that period of time. But just know if you're thinking about doing business in Georgia or you're doing it today, we are absolutely committed to continuing to spend at that pace, whether it's new equipment, new technology, room for expansion, and you've already heard the state is going to make sure that that connectivity in road access and our rail partners on the CSX and Norfolk Southern rail side are going to be there with you. Just a quick slide of and by the way, these are all available to you, I assume, on the internet. All right, Governor Deal talked about the latest on the Savannah Harbor Expansion Project. This is our deepening project. The state legislature this year, with their budget approval, will have the full state requirement funded, so about $266 million. For those of you that are in our business and have been sleeping for the last decade, I think everybody's seen a version of this slide. But really, for the effects of this in its simplest, let me get to the final punchline. The effects are pretty simple. Today's ships that come through the Panama Canal to the East Coast are limited to about 4,400 of those units, TEUs, in size. But they can be no deeper than 39.5 feet. If you flash forward to 2015, 2016, when the Panama Canal was expanded, that ship size will basically triple to 13,000 to 14,000 TEUs, and the depth will go from 39 to 50 feet. And when you're a shallow port like we are, that's why you hear so much noise about the need and the compelling need to deepen the Savannah River. Larger ships will be coming to the East Coast. The cost of shipping goods will be reduced by 20 to 40%, something like that. So Panama is going to do their job. Our ocean carriers are going to do their job of getting larger ships. We on this side of the pond need to make sure that we can receive those larger ships by having deeper waters. One of the things we will benefit as you see larger ships, you're going to see fewer ships coming and servicing light business or even growing business. But the scale that we've created in our ports on the container terminal size, again with growing our rail, all the road investments and the beltway that Toby put up, those are about meeting the needs a decade from now and beyond, not just about what we've got to meet today. But that whole scale is extremely important, and we think we do it better than anybody else in the country. We're not just growing for the sake of growth. I would challenge you to find another port on the East Coast or Gulf of the United States that has demonstrated a better environmental record than we have. So if you're doing business through our ports, know you've got a great environmental partner doing it. Whether it's diesel emissions, diesel consumption reductions, we've reduced our diesel consumption per unit by 55% over about the last decade. Better treatment of the water that's in our ports, light emissions, et cetera, et cetera. Just know that we're in it for good, and maybe most importantly, we're in it for the right reasons. There's not one thing that we've done over the last 5 years that we've done because there's been a local, a state, or a federal mandate. We have done it because we know to service growth in the right way, we've got to do it environmentally responsibly. So very quickly wrapping up, I will agree with Miguel and Ed. I think Ed brought it up. On a national scale, the U.S. port infrastructure has fallen behind. No challenge, no debate about it whatsoever. I speak to several at different federal levels in Washington, D.C., talk about it all the time. There needs to be a better focus. There needs to be better commitment to improve the overall port/freight network if we're going to stay competitive with our trading partners. Scale makes a difference. So when you hear about larger ships down the road, just know that having the single largest container terminal in the United States with both Class I railroads directly on port, having great highway access makes a huge difference. So we're in it, and we're in it for good. The growth in jobs, we think the economic impact of the jobs is only going to grow. Everything that moves through our port, whether it's on a truck or a rail or on and off a ship, people are handling that business. So as we grow, so grows the economic impact in jobs in the state of Georgia. And I'll just wrap it up by saying, you heard it this morning, when you think of our deepening, we couldn't ask anything more of Governor Deal. He's been extremely clear. Even though we have faced some federal challenges or challenges at the federal level, because it is a federal project, the state of Georgia and Governor Deal have made it clear that he's going to do everything he can, given a full green light, to spend Georgia's $266 million as quickly as he can to get this project going forward. Thank you for your attention, and we look forward to your questions.
Perfect, thank you. Thank you. And again, a rapid fire update. We do have a couple minutes for questions. We have some mic runners in the back. If you have a question, just raise your hand. And I've got plenty of questions. If the mic runners could come up, we got a question right here. We'll take a few questions. Actually, he got to you first. Over here. Try it now. We can't hear you.
Hello.
It's on now.
It works. There. No.
Try to speak right into the microphone, sir.
How do you run a 50-foot deep ship up a 47-foot channel?
How do you run a 50-foot ship up a 47-foot channel? If you could light up all these mics, please.
Mike?
You're good.
Mike, get up? Yeah, there you go. Well, effectively, you don't. The maximum draft, what that picture shows, the maximum draft of the ships will be actually in that we project to be in the core in that 46 to 47-foot range. We will be benefited in Savannah as we are today with a 7-foot tide. So the way you need to think about it, we've got a 47-foot channel at low tide, 54-foot channel at high tide. But so our maximum ship that we'll be able to handle will probably be about a 50-foot, 49 to 50-foot draft ship, but only at high tide. But realistically, we don't see ships coming on the east coast of the United States drawing that much water. They'll probably be in the 46 to 45-foot range.
It's about that window. Right here, sir?
Uh-oh. Can you hear me?
Yeah.
Yeah, this message is for Ed. With shortage of drivers and everything, with the government regulations and everything that we have to deal with, what is being done and what can be done to attract new blood into the industry, the younger generation?
If I understood that, that was what can be done to attract new drivers into the trucking industry. I think there are several things that are ongoing, one of which is a renewed emphasis on training programs for folk who are first coming into the industry or, for instance, coming out of the military. And there are a number of programs. I know some firms that are getting more and more involved in that. Another is actually changing basically the routing or the way the trucks are handling their drivers. That is, where possible, trucking companies are adjusting routes and trying to develop ways to get drivers more at-home time and to make it a more, not an easier job to do, but a more family-friendly job to do. And again, I'll just touch on the hours of service and the impact they have on that. The rules under the current hours of service, for instance, can have a truck driver, he's supposed to get a 34-hour restart, a 34-hour rest period. That can extend upwards of close to 50 hours if he happens to go off at the wrong time. Those are the kind of things where the inflexibility of the regulations actually have a real negative impact on your desire to drive, because obviously if you're driving, most of your compensation is based on your productivity. So when the regs cut productivity unnecessarily, it makes it difficult. But the industry's endlessly creative, and it's finding new ways to route, new ways to train, new ways to attract people.
Thank you. Ani?
Good morning. My name is Ani Agniotri from US-India Business Summit, and I have this question for Mr. Southwell. Does Hartsfield-Jackson Airport plan to operate any international airports in countries like Brazil, India, and China?
If I understand the question, you're asking if Hartsfield-Jackson plans to have a post in China?
No. Would you be operating or managing any large international airports outside USA?
It's a great question. Of course, because you have a status as the world's busiest airport, we continue to provide training for airport officials who want to have, they're looking at benchmarking airports. Just recently we had some people from Ghana. A few months ago we had some people from China. We're very interested in providing consulting services or management services for other airports. Currently, state law does not permit us to form a separate entity to be able to do that. That is something that we are looking at doing. We believe that there's a high potential to generate revenues in that area. For example, Frankfurt Airport, 25% of its revenues come from actually providing consulting services and management services of airports. It's something that we're very interested in doing and something that we're looking at.
Thank you.
This question is for Toby Carr, over here, David Austin from Paulding County. This probably affects Ed, and I know Curtis has heard this presentation. A couple of years ago, we started looking at Joint Development Authority for a toll road, or maybe called the Western Commercial Corridor. And we were unsuccessful getting those counties to get an agreement. But has the state looked at this plan for the Western Commercial Corridor, pretty much coming in at Red Top Mountain, coming out somewhere around Lamar or Butts County for an outer perimeter, which I experienced the ice storm and was stuck in Atlanta traffic. And with the deepening of the port, we shared this with Curtis, if you increase the truck traffic by 75%, where will those trucks go unless we have an outer perimeter? Thank you, Toby.
We on? Yep. All right, so great question. Oh, sorry about that. Great question. The Freight and Logistics Action Plan the study took that issue up, pretty much, it took it on directly. It was, do you build a toll road just a little bit to the west of I-285, which is the perimeter road around Atlanta, to create a western bypass around Atlanta. And two things came into play, and it was the cost of the right-of-way, because we've already got development going through that area. You mentioned, Red Top, we've got a huge economic development opportunity going on near there. Paulding has continued to grow, which is why we're driving so much investment toward 92 and some of its connectivity back to the interstate and through Cobb County. And so as you get into this higher dollar real estate, it then makes the cost higher, which means you can only support so much of a new road with toll revenues. Where do you get that additional subsidy? And it goes right back to, therefore, is that your best bang for the buck? Going back to the growth of the port, Curtis touched on it. Atlanta is where a lot of intermodal traffic is and where it's going. Atlanta has been a significant player in logistics for a long time. It's going to continue to do that. There's a lot of investment that continues to happen in Atlanta. And so the freight and logistics study actually found that we're going to continue, even as the port is deepened and it grows, we're going to continue to have a lot of traffic, truck traffic, where the destination is Atlanta. We're going to continue to have a lot of rail traffic where the destination is Atlanta, for there to be some sort of an intermodal change with those containers, where you need the road network in Atlanta to continue to be strong. But as you continue to grow, you're going to need a western bypass of Atlanta. Right now, the demand isn't there. That's what makes the toll road such a challenging proposition, because it's west, but it's not west enough. So what this study said was, we need to look at a Macon to LaGrange connection, so that you come in from the ports, from 16 or from 75 or from any point south and east. You come up 75 to Macon, or you hit 75 from 16 in Macon, and then you begin to cut across to LaGrange. The state designated corridor already reflects that, because it's going to be an important interstate to interstate connection. You get from Macon to LaGrange at 85, you can then actually pick up US 27 going up the western side of the state to go to Chattanooga. So what the study actually determined is, we need a western bypass. We need that bypass somewhere between 2030 and 2040. We need to start planning for it and implementing it now, but that western bypass will actually be a lot larger road-wise than a western bypass of Atlanta, larger in terms of road miles, but we're going to get the cost down by using existing assets, existing state routes between Macon and LaGrange, and upgrading them and continuing to 4-lane 27 on the west side.
Charles, I had a question. What we hear a lot about passenger trade. We've talked all about freight and logistics, the movement of products to customers. What possibilities and opportunities are there for passenger rail using freight lines?
So I would first say I can't speak for Norfolk Southern and CSX. They are the two most likely host railroads in a passenger situation. Obviously, you're speaking about a scenario where you are utilizing a private asset for a public use, and so obviously the owners of those private assets would enter into that discussion with a due amount of caution. I would say, though, that I think that all parties in transportation want to see the infrastructure of this state used for its highest and best use. And I would submit to you that I think that if passenger rail were the highest and best use of the freight network, that the railroads would be hauling passengers today. And I honestly believe that to be the case.
Okay. I think we have time for one more. Ma'am, you've been standing long enough.
Hi, my question is for Curtis. There's a strike underway in Vancouver right now, obviously, and the Longshoremen Union is already buzzing about a potential strike in July when contracts expire. Drivers in New Jersey are buzzing about strike of congestion. How are Georgia ports poised against strike action? Is there any threat of strike action here in South Atlantic ports, and are you prepared for the additional volume if ports do shut down and business comes our way?
Well, it's a great question. Effectively, just to summarize it for everybody, again, there's some fairly large service issues going on at ports around the United States today, and there's an abundance of concern about issues going on the West Coast. And although we've shifted a lot of freight to the East Coast, there's still a tremendous amount of freight that is coming to the East Coast, moving through the western ports, and at least in that central part of the country. We're going to do everything we can if there is freight that our customers want to move through Georgia to service them efficiently in Savannah on the container side of the business. What I would tell you is that with this, again, the scale that we have, and I think I can't overemphasize, being the single largest facility in the United States, we've got 25 ship-to-shore cranes, we have 116 overhead cranes within the yard that we use, the gate systems, and having both CSX and Norfolk Southern inside of our facility, it gives us an enormous amount of room to scale up if needed. So we can't replace or replicate everything that's going on the West Coast. We are extremely well known in the Southeast for the reliability of the services we provide. Trust me when I tell you, everybody in the supply chain is watching it very closely and is ready to mobilize as quickly as we can if we see an unusual spike in volumes coming through our ports.
Thank you. Well, that is all the time we have. Let's have another round of applause for our transportation panel. And now I have a favor to ask. I need your help. We are a little bit behind schedule. Our opportunity sessions start downstairs on the 4th floor. If you go down the escalators, you'll see them in these rooms. We have a great panel, shippers from all sorts, covering domestic logistics, exports, and imports. We need to have this room cleared as quickly as possible so we can reset this for lunch. So if you can please make your way down to the 4th floor, join in your favorite opportunity session, and I'll see you back in here at 12:15 for our lunch with our keynote speaker, the Vice President of Inbound Transportation from Walmart. Thank you very much.